In respecting the conservation of Indigenous built heritage is a dichotomy posed by the World Heritage Convention in separating nature and culture, intangible and intangible. The interconnections between nature and culture and the interrelationships between the tangible and intangible are integral to safeguarding Indigenous cultural heritage in the built form. Indigenous cultural heritage is inclusive of traditional knowledge systems and practices, cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, place, spirit of place, all of which may be represented in the built form. Indigenous knowledge, ways of knowing, and belief systems are often incommensurate with Western knowledge bases and practices. A participatory approach through dialogue and respect and recognition of Indigenous traditional processes and protocols is key to a successful conservation outcome. This paper will discuss key articles of the Faro Convention of 2005 and how they correspond with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007 in facilitating a dialogue with Indigenous peoples in developing a participatory approach in the decision-making process, in safeguarding, conserving, and protecting Indigenous.
You're muted, Diane. I think you muted yourself. Okay. Should work now.
How long have I been unmuted?
10 seconds. Yes, now it works. 10 seconds. Yes, I think a few seconds only.
Okay, thank you. So I will, further to this, case studies that are representative of successful outcomes in safeguarding Indigenous heritage through dialogue, collaborative, and participatory approaches will be discussed. Before I delve into the Faro Convention, I would like to first reference other foundational documents that preceded the convention that were instrumental in working towards community and culturally inclusive approaches within the conservation project and by extension, Indigenous heritage. These documents include the NARA document on authenticity, the Borough Charter, and the Convention for the Safeguarding on the Intangible Cultural Heritage. The NARA document on authenticity was designed to bring greater respect for cultural and heritage diversity to conservation practice and to apply authenticity in ways in which respected the cultural values of societies. It marked a significant shift away from predominantly historical, material, and technical-based approaches to the restoration project to a more culturally inclusive and culturally diverse process, theoretically and in praxis. It was instrumental in expanding the scope of cultural heritage and represented a significant step forward in recognizing cultural heritage values and protocols that are more commensurate with Indigenous cultural heritage. The underlying significance of the NARA document is that it extended authenticity to be inclusive of values based on cultural context. The respect due to all cultures requires that heritage properties must be considered and judged within the cultural context to which they belong. Article 8 of the NARA document states that the responsibility for cultural heritage and management of it belongs to the cultural community that generated it, and at the same time emphasizes the importance of adherence to international charters and conventions in carrying out the conservation process. This calls for a culturally inclusive approach through dialogue, participatory practices between the respective cultural community and conservation experts. The shift of in trajectory of the NARA document posed some major challenges in the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, amongst them reconciling the disconnection between nature and culture, tangible and intangible, as represented by the World Heritage Convention guidelines. The NARA document was also a foundational document for the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding on the Intangible Cultural Heritage. All cultures and societies are rooted in the particular forms and means of tangible and intangible expression which constitute their heritage, and these should be respected. The newly published ICOMOS Charter on Intangible Cultural Heritage of 2024 does begin to emphasize interconnections between intangible and tangible heritage in the built form. A number of articles of the NARA document have been expanded upon and extended to relate to a more European context in the Faro Convention. The Faro Convention of 2005, created by the Council of Europe as a framework on the value of cultural heritage for society, also provides a framework, a further step towards the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives and values within the larger conservation and restoration context of world heritage. The major contributing factors of the Faro Convention on the value of cultural heritage for society also have relevance for Indigenous cultural heritage, as the inclusion of inherent rights holders in the decision-making process, advocating for rights holders to be actively engaged in identifying the subjects of protection, in defining their heritage, and determining the forms of heritage protection. Territorial and land use rights, advocating a participatory approach through dialogue. The Faro Convention promotes the right of every person to freely engage with the cultural heritage of their choice, as protected by the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Treating all cultures equitably, advocating for the inclusivity of everyone in society, and defining and managing cultural heritage, including heritage as a resource for sustainable development, enriching the processes of economic, political, social, and cultural development, and land use planning, as well as promoting dialogue amongst cultures and religions. In 2007, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, was adopted by the UN General Assembly to address the gaps in the UN Declaration on the Human Rights in recognizing the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples globally. It has been instrumental in advancing the recognition of Indigenous cultural heritage in all its diverse forms. What do the Faro Convention and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples have in common? In response, I analyzed the specific articles of the Faro Convention, specifically Articles 1, 2, 4, 5 to 9, and 14 in relation to UNDRIP. As the Faro Convention promotes the right of every person to freely engage with the cultural heritage of their choice, treating all cultures equitably, UNDRIP ensures Indigenous peoples as the inherent rights holders in the decision-making process, in identifying the subjects of protection, defining their heritage, and in determining the forms of heritage protection. Article 33 of UNDRIP. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions, as well as the manifestations of their sciences, technologies, and cultures, oral traditions, literatures, design, sports, traditional games, visual and performing arts. In keeping with the Faroes Convention, emphasis on culture and economics, UNDRIP includes the rights of Indigenous peoples as to the culture and economic development as their land in Article 26. Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned. Indigenous peoples have the right to own, use, develop, and control the land, territories, and resources that they possess by reason of traditional ownership or other traditional occupation. States shall give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources. With such recognition shall be conducted with due respect to the customs, traditions, and land tenure systems. The implementation of Article 32 of UNDRIP calls for a dialogue between state parties, stakeholders, and Indigenous peoples as right holders and advocates for a participatory approach. States shall consult and cooperate in good faith with Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories or other resources. For conservation experts, both the Faro Convention and the UNDRIP provide a framework for facilitating a dialogue with Indigenous peoples as right holders, developing participatory approaches in the decision-making process, in safeguarding, conserving, and protecting Indigenous cultural heritage, which is crucial. There are unique challenges when the right holders of cultural property are Indigenous peoples, with inherent rights to the site, place, land. These challenges require a knowledge of Indigenous community and its cultural values, the protocols of the community, and recognizing that more than one Indigenous community may be involved, especially in the safeguarding of territories or land management, which requires a knowledge of the diverse cultural traits and varying protocols of each individual community.
5 minutes remaining, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you. When working with rights holders in the conservation and management of the cultural property, it is contingent on conservation experts to recognize free, prior, and informed consent is essential in working with rights holders. Engage with rights holders in a systematic manner of all stages of the heritage process, respecting Indigenous protocols, and plan, and this is critical, parallel approaches where shared approaches may not be possible. Now, I would like to review just a few case studies with you that are representative of successful outcomes in safeguarding Indigenous heritage in the built form through dialogue, collaborative, and participatory approaches. I won't have time to go into the case studies in depth, but with hopefully in the publication of this paper, I will elaborate on that further. So participatory approaches are inherent in the decision-making process for Indigenous cultures. The challenge for non-Indigenous conservation practitioners is to respect and recognize Indigenous protocols, and that each Indigenous culture, each Indigenous community is separate and distinct and has their own protocols according to their traditional cultures and beliefs. The Faro Convention's inclusion of the cultural values of territory is critical for Indigenous culture in regard to the built form, including settlements, place, and spirit of place. In studying the land management use systems, both in Europe and Canada, one of the most eloquent land use management systems that I've worked with is that of the Stolo Nation in the interior British Columbia. The lands of the Stolo Nation formally constitute a territory. Their land use management plan is based on a mapping of cultural sites of the territory with an explicit demarcation of hierarchies according to cultural values, priorities, and religious sites. Each hierarchy is equated with a value system and prioritized. The land use varies according to the hierarchies. Geographical location, topography, natural resources are all integral and interconnected with the cultural heritage of Indigenous peoples. A building is not just a building, it is also its connectedness to the land, to place and spirit of place. In reference to Indigenous historic sites in Canada, the nomination process has always been state-led, with limited success in securing World Heritage designations for Indigenous sites. The state party has adhered to the convention divide between culture and nature. Over the last few years, there has been a decided shift whereby the nomination process of Indigenous sites have been Indigenous-led with successful outcomes. Two such case studies are Pimachauan Aki, the land that gives life, and Tronda Klondike, which was just designated in 2024, which includes both the settlement, the cultural landscape, and intangible cultural heritage. The conservation of built heritage also, in closing, the conservation of built heritage also involves revitalizing architectural traditions and sometimes requires conservation. Sometimes requires reconstruction, which is another paper. One of the traditional forms of Indigenous Pacific Northwest Coast architecture is the post and beam structure of the longhouse. The post and beam structure is also repeated in the house gates, which protect the longhouse. And just in closing, the Museum of Anthropology was just recently, this iconic building of the Pacific Northwest Coast just went through a major restoration, reconstruction, and seismic upgrading. When the World Heritage Convention guidelines were first published in 1972, and participatory approaches were not part of the architecture conservation process, the architect, Arthur Erickson, was engaged in 1972 to design the Museum of Anthropology on the University of British Columbia campus, along with landscape architect Cornelia Oberlander. Both Arthur and Cornelia collaborated extensively with the Haida Nation, and particularly the world-famous Haida artist Bill Reed. Ericsson's mandate was to construct a building that would house and protect Indigenous built forms from the climate, respecting the culture-nature interconnections, the intangible elements embedded in the built form, and the soaring verticality of the totem poles to be housed. As many of the Indigenous structures were built of wood, located in the geographic setting of the Pacific Northwest Coast rainforest, as the architecture in temples in Japan, they needed to be rebuilt from time to time. Many of these structures were eroded over time due to climatic conditions and also through destruction and erasure with colonization of Canada. This brings us to another important factor in conserving Indigenous built heritage through revitalizing and reconstructing Indigenous built traditions as part of a living heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for this very interesting and really well-timed presentation. Thank you. So we will come to the questions in the end of the session. So now I will welcome the next, maybe you could unshare your screen so we can welcome Chih-Wen Lan from Taiwan. Yes, I see you. Could you please share your presentation?
Okay. Okay, can you hear me and can you see my video?
Well, now we see you, but we don't see your. Oh, it's your presentation. Okay, perfect.
Yes,
So
yes, I record.
is it a pre-recorded presentation?
Yes.
Ah,
yes.
okay. So I won't have to remind you about the time then. Okay. So
Yes, yes. It
Okay,
is
so
under control.
okay, so you can start your presentation then. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chih-Wen from China University of Technology, Department of Architecture, Assistant Professor in Taiwan. Now I will present. My title is about understanding heritage conservation challenges in contemporary Taiwan, a study of traditional conservation philosophy through classical texts. At first, I will present my research motivation. Since Manise Charter start, and Taiwan following the thinking of the Manise Charter to make a preservation work. Until now, over 15 years, we are still challenging for the preservation work. So we are thinking about what is the problem about the heritage conservation in Taiwan. The second is there is a very famous scholar, Liang Shichen. He writes a book about Chinese architecture history, and he focused on the Chinese architecture culture is wooden culture, and the Western architecture culture is stone. So because of different, he thought the wooden culture is not seeking eternal preservation of original object. That means the wooden can be dyed, can be substitute. So that is one his argumentation. So from this argumentation, we are also thinking, is the heritage conservation thinking is from Western thinking? Is it fit for the Han Chinese people? Or the Han Chinese people thinking has the heritage conservation thinking, but not similar to the Western thinking? So from this question, I start my research. My research methodology is I start to search the database from the preaching school of thought. The thinking before the Qing dynasty, the time is before 200 before century. At that time, there are a lot of thinking. For example, Confucius, Taoist, or Legalist. They are very famous thinker, and now has a strong influence in Han Chinese society. From this beginning, I start use the keyword to their database, because when I key in cultural heritage conservation, the word to this database, there is almost no result. So I start to make a keywords related to the heritage conservation, like object. Object is the crucial thinking, like Liang Sichen's thinking, not for preserving the eternal things to forever, object forever. And the other is keywords are ancient, the dwelling, gate, room, house, repair, place, meant, chamber, wall, vessel, build, wall, renovate. So you can find my keywords are about the most focus on the building heritage, or building to renovate, or building old building. What is the manner of the old building from the ancient Thai people? So I get some results. So I divide the result in 3 parts. And in general, actually, there are a lot of results, but because of the limit of the presentation time, I will arrange the result in 3 parts. And the first I found the result, plenty of the result is the word object. So I found the object and also redacted the all object and find a result from different thinking. The first is from Taoist perspective. Their thinking from the Taoist thinking of object is objects are also like human. Human will live, will die. The object will be also live and die. So that is nature. And the second is if you are all not attachment to the material or things, you have the spirit of freedom. That means if you are always attachment to object, your spirit will not be free. That is Taoist, their freedom of thinking about the object. The second is Confucius perspective. The Confucian, their emphasis is ethical government, and also interaction between hierarchy, social hierarchy. If you are leader, what is your ethical leadership? Or if you are normal person, what is your ethic? So from this perspective, they emphasize if you are a leader, you should care of your people. If you care of your people, you have also the moral of to caring of object. So if you keep in the material or object, preserve it, that means you have a good moral of the leadership or a good person. And the third is the legalist perspective. The legalist thinking is about how to keep a nation strong, how to let the people rich. So from his point of view, they think if the people, they are keeping their buildings well, their walls well, the people will feel safe. The country will be very strong. So that is very important to let the people, if they have well keeping the building, their surrounding, that is a good essential to keep your power, keep your nation power and your people rich. That is the thinking of legalists. So in general, the conclusion will be categorized that the Han Chinese thinking, their society will think the preservation is the moral values. That means if you keep it, you will not waste the thing. That is the moral value. So you can keep that like your daily life. That is a life attitude. So that is a crucial and a part of life to preserve. So the extent of the thinking is if the things are kept very well, that can be also your nation will have good forests and good governments. And the last reason is a practical reason. That means if something, it can be used. So you can keep it, not waste it if it can be used. So that is also a practical reason. So in the preliminary conclusion, we will say that from my first stage of the conclusion is from the Han Chinese thinking, they think the practical living philosophy. That means preservation is a part of life. So if you know the past, you keep it, and you will know the future. That is down. So I will keep a small note because that is my preliminary research. So if I will make the deeper research, I think I will make more deeper knowing about Chinese culture and society. So that is my presentation. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you.
If you still have something to add, you have 5 minutes left. So if you want to add something live, please don't hesitate. Or otherwise, yes, go ahead.
Okay, because my research is based on the keywords, so maybe the keywords can't cover all thinking, all the Han Chinese philosophy thinking for heritage conservation or all old object to preserve. So I think that is my first stage finding, and I wish that I can let some people to have different thinking between the West, East, and the East people to facing on the conservation philosophy. That is my last comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for introducing us to these perspectives. And well, we hope to learn more from your paper. For your paper contribution. So now we can move on to the next speaker, who will be Nilüfer. I think it's you who will present this.
I will be presenting with İlke. She's sharing. Yeah, we can start if it's okay.
Okay, so for a contribution titled Dialogue Between Conservation Experts and Stakeholders, case study from Istanbul, Ataköy Housing Estate. So keep time in mind, 15 minutes. I might remind you if you're coming closer to the end.
Yes, please do. Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Our paper this afternoon will focus on document Turkey's ongoing efforts for more than 20 years for a housing estate, a post-war modern estate in Istanbul. Looking at other papers, there are two things we should, I think, set out at the beginning as different from perhaps the other cases that we have discussed today. Although it has been recognized by expert institutions like Docomomo in ICOMOS and the Chamber of Architects, UIA, etc., this is a formally unrecognized heritage site at the moment, so the state does not recognize it. And our community here, the stakeholders, are actually the real owners of the area. They are house owners with title deeds. So please keep those facts in mind while you're listening. The group that's making the presentation today, we are all architects with architectural cultural heritage preservation PhD degrees. We have founded Docomomo Turkey in 2002 and more recently the ICOMOS Turkey National Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage. The first slide is to show you the extent of Istanbul. Istanbul is a very large metropolitan area housing more than 17 million people at the moment. The gray-black underneath is the current situation, but in the 1950s, the light brown yellow areas were the actual extent of the urban sprawl. And the project we are going to talk about today marked here is Ataköy on the Western Development Corridor, as it was called then. There were two other development corridors towards the north, along sort of parallel to the Bosphorus, and then on the Anatolian side towards the east-southeast. Some comparative examples to understand what Ataköy is. One of these is the Levant estate here on the Northern Development Corridor that I have just shown. It was very luckily designated in 2008, a status we have not achieved for Ataköy yet. There are many estates, similar developments in post-war Europe, of course. Here are two examples, Lienbahn in Rotterdam and Berlin Hanseviertel in Berlin. The story of Ataköy began with a very, very large area, which you see on the screen, which was bought by the major producer of housing at the time, Türkiye Emlak Kredi Bank, which was also a bank, but also constructing houses. Following an undecided international competition, a project office was founded in Baruthane, which was the old Ottoman gunpowder production area, under the directorship of a older architect at the time, Ertuğrul Menteşe, and with Luigi Piccinato, who was the international consultant in planning. Here you see the conceptual plan, and construction of the site continued until the 2000s. The first part completed was the beach facilities you see at the bottom here, before the housing. Here you see a later picture, of course, with the blocks standing behind. And it remained in use until the 1980s. Following that, the touristic facilities on the shore and the first housing developments, phases 1 and 2, which we will be talking about today, were completed. This was a new town morphology satellite settlement, then quite outside the urban sprawl of Istanbul on its fringe, today located in a very dense environment. In these two phases, we have 90 blocks, differing in size 2 to 13 stories, a total of more than 1,500 apartments in 16 different types. The blocks are repeated from one to several times. And sizes are, of course, different from 2+1s to 7+1s, and in terms of meters square, from about 93 square meters to 248 square meters. The open spaces are public, left to the municipality, so owned publicly, but they are interconnected with the blocks surrounding them and creating a very nice and desirable living environment. The least dense area in Istanbul at this time. Vehicular and pedestrian circulation are separated. There is zoning with a primary school, commercial areas, mosque, etc. And the changes in ownership legislation, which made condominium ownership possible, supported the development of this type of areas beginning from the mid 1950s. The architects, in this case led by Firuzan Baytop, created a memorial in concrete. This may still be seen in the commercial area of Phase 2. So like Hollywood, they have their names and handprints in cement. The green areas, as you see on the right-hand side, developed very dense vegetation. According to an original landscape design, which you see here better, and the variations of block types, a bit of architecture, but also uniting architectural vocabulary created a diverse and positive modern built environment. The sociocultural structure of the inhabitants was and still is spatial. They are highly educated, upper middle class stakeholders with a vision to sustain the current situation of the estate without changes. Of the additional zones, there were 2 primary schools planned, but only one was built. It's a very unique design. It became designated in 2006 with an application from Docomo Turkey and ICOMOS, and it was restored several years later in 2010-11, consulted by Docomo Turkey for strengthening without changing the original characteristics of the building. The touristic facilities remained in use until the 1990s, despite the sea pollution, which increased in the 1980s, but were then abandoned and unfortunately demolished for development projects by the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality in 2008 and 9, disrupting the integrity of the estate and ending its relationship with the seashore completely. This is a graphic. It's a bit hard to read, I'm afraid, from the small screen, but this is to show that construction industry, especially since the 2000 mark here, being the leading income bringer in Turkey. So it is growing ever again with a slight decrease here. And it creates jobs for many people. So unfortunately, its importance is endangering already existing sites with threats of regeneration and development. So, of course, after the 1980 military coup, especially from 1960 to 80, it was more of a sort of left-leaning socialist state. Then after the 1980s, it became quite liberal with a lot of privatization, which also meant losses of publicly owned heritage quality buildings in many cases. And after the 2000s, of course, the neoliberal and post-liberal economies are becoming harder to control. The 1999 Marmara earthquake and the more recent 2023 earthquakes are drivers for reconstruction, demolition and reconstruction in urban areas, but it's being used as an excuse where strengthening, cheaper solutions, strengthening buildings and continuing them could be possible. Yeah, I think next, İlke. Sorry. Yeah, I forgot about the urban transformation law. Yes, it's also on this slide. So this is a timeline for our involvement with the site. which began in the late 50s. We have been involved since the 1999 mark, more or less. Yes, urban transformation legislation is pushing for demolition and rebuilding rather than restoration. And we have
5 minutes remaining.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've been very slow. Sorry. Okay, yeah, we can go on. Yes, that's the beginning of our relationship with the ICOMOS and DOCOMOMO joint meeting in Istanbul on 20th century heritage. Then we included Ataköy in several national selections. Yeah, next. We held the first ever DOCOMOMO International Workshop at the site with more than 100 people and 18 academic institutions, which was very good in creating interesting stakeholders. Yes. Yeah, we applied for designation in 2008. We were rejected. Then the shoreline completely changed. I think next you can, then you can go on. Yes, so this happened at the shore, and well, we have lost the battle there, but we are trying to win the remaining battles.
I'll be quick as I can. And
Yes.
in the more recent years, the low density area of the estate is under threat with new developments suggested on empty areas. One of these opposed in various ways with the stakeholders ended in a lawsuit, unfortunately with a negative result of a few months ago. The green area you see here, also the earthquake meeting and safety zone for the estate, is going to be developed with a large new building unless designation could stop the process. Following new high-rise development next to it, the commercial area of phase 1 was demolished in 2023, also for new and unknown development. DOCOMO Turkey continued to be a part of the campaigns and support the stakeholders against these new developments and urban transformation projects. On the right, we can see the co-chair of DOCOMO Turkey delivering a presentation on the significance of Ataköy. The potential for structural strengthening of the housing blocks was also shared with the community during this meeting. Since the 2023 earthquakes and with the rising threats, DOCOMO Turkey and İCOMOS Turkey National Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage have taken an active role bringing the situation to public attention, both nationally within international expert circles, while also advocating for public involvement and engaging with decision makers, such as ministries and municipalities. Campaigns, heritage at risk alerts, and petitions have been organized with extensive social media engagement, reaching both local and national media outlets. And recently, ICOMOS Heritage Alert statement has now reached us, and it's expected to be published on the ICOMOS International website soon. We remain hopeful that the letters of concern, which will soon be sent to a wide range of decision-making authorities, will contribute to raising awareness and fostering meaningful action. We can see the QR code, and your support will be very appreciated. In addition to campaigns direct to general public, Ataköy was also brought forward in national and international conferences, meetings, and seminars. Especially national professional publications were utilized to bring the problem to the attention of architecture and planning circles. Further protests, written declarations, and meeting with local decision-making authorities followed, particularly in opposition to the proposed demolition of one of the blocks for urban transformation, based on claims that it was not earthquake safe. However, the campaigns were not successful, and F block was demolished last year, not in 5 days as planned based on a misconception of its structural instability, but in 6 weeks, proving its structural strength. This year, the housing complex faces further threats, with 2 more blocks marked in yellow under the risk of demolition, unless legal protection is secured through heritage recognition and designation. We're bound to lose most of our 20th century heritage. Now we shift our focus to a broader perspective and examine how the Faro Convention adopted by Council of Europe in 2005 provides a theoretical foundation for understanding the issues surrounding Ataköy.
Okay, don't be too long because you've already talked 15 minutes, but yes.
Yeah, okay. So I will continue. Fur Convention establishes that cultural heritage is both a right and a responsibility. The estate provides an example of such heritage community. Since the early 20s, residents, academics, NGOs, and professions have worked to preserve its architectural, historical, and social significance through workshops, campaigns, and academic collaborations. And Convention underscores that cultural heritage should be integrated into sustainable development strategies rather than treated as an isolated concern. So Article 5 and 9 highlight this public interest and need for integration into urban planning. And sustainability has three key dimensions: environmental, economic, and social. As mentioned earlier, the current conditions in Turkey frequently contradict all three, especially the environmental aspect. Unfortunately, Ataköy is no exception, as economic priorities frequently override heritage and environmental concerns, even among residents. And one key goal of Faro Convention is to make heritage central to sustainable development, yet Ataköy's case illustrates how, without institutional support and integration into planning frameworks, heritage remains vulnerable to destruction. Recognizing this, our focus today is to embed heritage in urban policies through decision-maker engagement and sustainable strategies. And Faro Convention recognizes cultural heritage as a tool for dialogue and conflict resolution. And in line with these principles, local NGOs are creating new platforms to raise awareness on heritage recognition and sustainable management. However, economic concerns and earthquake safety remain major obstacles, especially for middle-class homeowners. For many residents, seismic safety takes priority over preservation. To address these concerns, stakeholder and decision-maker involvement at all levels has become a key focus for expert and professional organizations. In July last year, a meeting was held at the local municipality with the mayor, and Ataköy's heritage value and the feasibility of structural strengthening was discussed. Yet, public perspectives remain divided. While some support preservation, many prioritize economic stability and safety. As a result, the challenge lies not only in raising awareness, but also finding solutions that address both preservation and structural safety. Tension clearly seen in Ataköy. So, Convention calls for legal and institutional recognition of cultural heritage, emphasizing the need for an integrated and collaborative approach to its management. However, in the case of Ataköy, such recognition remains absent. The local municipality holds the authority to regulate, approve, and enforce planning policies in the area. However, this authority is currently exercised under the Turkish Act on the transformation of areas under disaster risk. Prioritizing urban transformation over heritage conservation is crucial to persuade the municipality to incorporate heritage protection into urban planning policies. As ICOMOS Turkey 20th Century Scientific Committee and Docomomo Turkey, we continue to provide expert support in this process by proposing alternative approaches to designation, ensuring that heritage protection is integrated into municipal planning. Our efforts focus on advocating for solutions such as special designation within the urban plan and recognizing areas with characteristics that should be preserved. In a moment, my colleague will elaborate on these strategies and ongoing initiatives.
Yeah, but there's not time for
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah,
well, I think you really have to wrap it up because
I'm wrapping up.
This is the last slide. Sorry.
Yeah, we have changed our strategy from looking for a state designation, which seems well, a bit erratic and not very well directed, it seems, at this stage. And we have turned our focus towards local administrations, municipalities who can control planning and give architectural and building permits and so on. And just as a last note, of course, Ataköy is not alone. In the last 5 years only, we have had several cases. Here you see 2 more examples from Ankara, which are under threat. The one on the left has been the object of a very unwanted urban transformation. And the one on the right is just starting out. Again, a place where we have public and community engagement. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I think that not only in Turkey, but I think in every country, I think everybody in the room, I think, has similar cases with modern areas. So thank you very much. Now we move on back to Romania. Yes, I see you, Oana Diaconescu.
Perfect.
Who will, who will discuss regeneration of the Romanian rural heritage. So thank you very much, Oana, for respecting the 15 minutes, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, it was very interesting, the presentation that I heard before. And I think what I'm going to present you, it's exactly the opposite, because I'm going to talk about the Romanian rural heritage. So basically, one of the problems that say that Romania has, and perhaps a lot of other European countries, is that we are so focused on conserving the urban heritage, and in our case, at least, we actually forgot about the rural one. But before starting, I want to say that I am really sorry not being with you, because I think all the atmosphere there, it's wonderful. So turning back to the presentation, just some words about this rural topic. Basically, what I am going to present you is a part of our heritage. We are talking about an A-class, a national patrimony, about the kulas. So it is a type of housing that was not found only in Romania, but also in Serbia and other countries. And it was used during the 18th century, mostly during the Ottoman invasions. So we are very close to Turkey now and in very good relations, but unfortunately history made us discover some very difficult parts. And these architectural elements were fortified, and they were used by a family, a noble family, in order to protect actually the people who were living there. So basically, as you can see in these images, because here are some very well preserved examples from Mălărești. We are talking about the Greceanu kulas. There is also another one called Duca. So there are plenty of them in the south of Romania. And yet, as you can see, basically they have these fortified elements at the ground floor. There is some kind of a movable stair to the upper floor, and the 1 meter thick walls actually protect from any kind of invasion. What we tried to do, actually, the real topic of the project is that we are universitary, so I'm talking about the University of Architecture and Urbanism from Bucharest. And we found out that there are plenty of these monuments that need us. So what we tried to do was, first of all, with one of the most important companies of electricity and gas in Romania, was to consolidate the awareness of people, of citizens, about the patrimony. So we started using a web page, and we made some votation. So from the almost 30 kulas that we found out that needed this kind of intervention, we tried to select 3 of them that could actually benefit of our projects, of our practice, and then of course talking with some association, why not to try to conserve them and to restore them. So I think it was a very courageous project. We have started this by talking with the National Institute of Patrimony that we had the pleasure to hear today. And it was very important, this collaboration, because actually we had the first information about the 3 kulas that were actually voted by the public. You have to note that there were thousands of people from all over Romania who started to become very interested in the project. The project was called Kulas into the Light. And it developed for almost 1 year. We have started our journey in January, and we have finished the projects in September. So basically here you have some images of the 3 kulas that we actually choose. The first one that you can see almost in the middle is actually a wood house. So there were 2 types of kulas, as we know, these fortified houses. Some of them were really in having like stone walls, brick walls. Some others were just in wood. And unfortunately, only 2 of them in wood remain in the country. And one of these that you can see here, called Eftimie Nicolaescu in the official documents, but we found out that the real name was Eftichia, from the owner of the kula, actually was destroyed because of the village who had to be displaced for the use of the mine. So it is a very sad example. Davan Kula, that you can see just a few elements of it with our students measuring inside. And the one that I would like to present you next as a case study is the one of Ciobăchintescu from Șiacu. Here you can see some of our projects. It's actually the students imagine that these houses could be restored. Of course, we also had an exhibition because for us as university was very important not only to meet the locals and the people who were using social media in order to know the project, but also the professionals. So basically, our students started to understand which is the typology of the house. They also try to identify how these villages were developed and what kind of elements were brought from these fortified houses to the houses that can still be visited and that are used actually in these villages. So from the SWOT analysis, we understood that it was imposed to make this kind of interventions. The degradations were actually, as you can also see in the photos, it's not so much to talk about because it was very damaged. And unfortunately, it also lost the roof. And our proposal, of course, was the one of musealizing the whole building, because first of all, its dimension, and second of all, the necessity in having this awareness by the whole community. And here we arrived at the second phase, which actually is the most important one. When we have talked as a university with this non-governmental association, which is called the Ambulance for Monuments, and which actually is helping a lot of construction from the rural patrimony, is helping the locals in order to be saved and to be protected. So first of all is this process of awareness. Second of all, they used, of course, the projects if they are. And the third, it's the restoration and conservation phase. So what you see here are our students. Part of them participated to the first phase that was the one happening in the university. And then they really wanted to go on the site and try to make their best in improving the situation of the school. Why is so important for us this kind of example? Because first of all, I think is one of the few examples in which the university becomes a strategic partner in developing this kind of proposals. For us, it was very important to understand what the participatory process meant, how the citizens and the administration could be integrated, and also, of course, the students who are the future professionals in this kind of using monuments and understanding the goods. So what they and we succeeded was actually the restoration and let's say a protection of the skula, also putting the roof in top of it in order to conserve it better. But what I have to tell you is that only just a few months later, a group of people came inside and just try to destroy again, not understanding the benefit of this process and thinking that inside they will discover something that unfortunately was not there. But for us as specialists, as architects, it's so important to conserve just the few examples of this kind of architecture, fortified architecture. Thank you very much. I hope I was brief enough in order
Yes, you were very brief.
in order to present this case study that, again, for us was just the beginning of an idea about how we can put together all these people involved in conserving patrimony. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for this inspiring example. And I like your logo very much. Did you draw it yourself or the students? It was beautiful with the M and people holding the monument together. I don't know.
Let's hope we will do more and more projects like this, and we will have the possibility to show you more in the next years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sue.
So now the last presentation will be
I don't see him
from Brazil.
I don't see him.
We're looking for João Chincario. I don't know if it's well pronounced. Maybe in the participants. João, are you with us? Doesn't seem so.
There's a note in chat.
Maybe yes. Wait. No, it was only for the audio. What do we do in such circumstances? Do we wait 2 minutes or?
I'm going to start to conclude. Yes, maybe in the meantime.
But maybe there are already questions for
Yes,
the former presenters. Maybe we can see if there are some questions, and then maybe in the meantime, João will join. So, does someone have questions for Nilüfer, for Oana, for Chih-Wen or for Diane? Yes?
I have a question for how is there any indication, or do you have records or archival material on how effective these structures were in terms of fortification? Like, I was just looking at these structures and trying to understand how they functioned as fortifications. So people ran in there and waited out an attack, or how did they function? I'm sorry.
Did you hear the question? Oana?
Yes, I heard it. So
okay.
So basically, if you saw, basically we are talking about two-level house, rarely three-level house. The first level, the ground floor, had just one opening. That was the main door, and that was actually a very strong metal door. And it was just that mobile stair, wooden stair, that they could take on from the ground floor to the first floor. And the whole family actually was staying for days in the first floor. They had all they needed there, and also it was having the bedrooms, let's say. And at the third floor, sometimes I told you that sometimes there was a third floor. It was some kind of a porch that they could see from in the horizon if there was some invasion coming. So basically, they functioned like this. They were in top of a hill, so they could have a very good view, a very good perspective.
So they never fought back. They just hid, basically. It wasn't at all intended as offensive, just defensive.
Yeah, only defensive. Yes.
And if it was wooden, how did that, I mean, if it was wooden, you could just light it up, no? Like,
yeah, so
why would you have wooden structures that are defensive that way?
So the real fortified kulas are not the one in wood, as you well said, but after the Turkish invasion was not actually the most important meaning in building this kind of kulas, because it was a symbol of nobility, of very wealthy family. Some of the people from the villages started to use this kind of fortified elements, but in wood. So this is why we have the two wooden kulas. We call them kulas, but they are like this because we associate them to this kind of patrimony.
They basically became an architectural type rather than necessarily a fortification.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question? Joao is joining us finally, so waiting for him, we might have room for another question. No questions? Well, I might have a very specific question for Chih-Wen. It's about, in your first slide, you mentioned the Venice Charter, and this is a topic of interest for me. And I was wondering if this reflection on terminology based on classical texts and so on could also help understanding the Chinese translations of the Venice Charter.
You mean, is there any translation about the Venice Charter in our country? Yeah.
There is. There have been a few. I think now it's the third translation has just been published. But I was wondering, in terms of terminology, were there some sort of different interpretation based on these different perspectives?
Oh, I just mentioned about the Venice Charter because that is a very important charter for us to have to raise the awareness to make a heritage presentation, because before time we don't have this awareness, and after this Venice Charter and some protection movement, so the people they start the awareness to protect the heritage is also to protect our history and so on. That is a beginning. It has no any meaning without with the content and against our culture, not and not. That is not my mention, just because of at this time and this Venice Charter, we start to have the awareness to protect our heritage. But until now, it is very hard to work on it. So I'm thinking, why is there the heritage conservation thinking comes from Western world? Just so I start this question and try to find some original, maybe there are original thinking of heritage conservation in the Han Chinese thinking culture. So I start with the keywords in a very old ancient book. That
Okay.
is my initial thinking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Joao with us now? Still not. So we need another question, please. Everybody's very tired.
I have a
Maybe. Okay, there is a question.
question for our Turkish colleagues. Because dealing with urban modernist heritage is, I think, very challenging. I'm curious if there is any kind of research on the changing perspectives and changing reception of this kind of heritage in the society at large. So not within professionals, but within the population. There have been various, TV programs, media campaigns, for example, in the UK, consulting the general public about that, and who thinks is the worst kind of housing estates or new town planning and things like that. So that would be the lot, I think, for a negative perception, about 20 years ago. So I'm just curious what's happening in Turkey in relation to this kind of social housing heritage.
Well, there are several projects in Europe, of course, you know about them. The most negated one is probably the socialist heritage of the former Eastern Bloc. In Turkey, there is not such a sort of political meaning to it, I must say, which is positive, but our problem comes from mostly the construction industry's importance, I must say. There have been international surveys on the thing, but it's usually among the experts. Like you must know, ICOMOS had a survey last year on 20th century heritage, its importance in education. Also, the Getty Institute had one on the importance of or introduction of 20th century heritage into education programs in architecture, planning, design, etc. But I mean that there is no such survey in Turkey, so it's the campaigns we are able to do, but this earthquake risk has become very real in the last 2 years with the formal number is about 40,000 dead, but the real number is probably much more. So it has been a scare, and people are easily scared for their own safety. So the preservation of older housing areas is becoming a real problem. We are trying to act against it and promote, of course, sustainable conservation, structural strengthening, so on and so forth. And I think the municipalities are a bit turning their face to it rather than pulling everything down and rebuilding them. But there's a new structural strengthening regulation for Istanbul. And if we can find the economic means also to promote such interventions, then I think we might have a chance. I don't know if that's an answer enough, but that's all I can do at the moment.
Yeah, it seems so. It seems so. But well, we are still missing Joao, so I suppose we'll have to read his contribution in the journal after the conference, as he's not joining. So I give the floor to Boguslav.
Thanks a lot for chairing this final session. Dear colleagues, it's time to conclude, to close. So are there any general final remarks concluding our conference? Do you have any? How to introduce order in that unordered word? Is it possible? Dear colleagues, it seems every year we're searching for the topic which is the most suitable for our discipline. And that's the process lasting since 20 years. But this year I have the impression that we are very close to the main topics and to main challenges of our discipline. Because if we could try to summarize where is the so-called paradigm shift of our discipline, so probably trying to sum up to only one factor, that would be the shift from the specialists to the stakeholders. And that process has many different consequences, as we saw. We now have great variety of the heritage. As a result of that, we lost the universalism of the form of the protection. Instead of having specialists responsible for the heritage protection, we have different small, sometimes very small communities. They are responsible for the heritage because they feel that they are owners of the heritage. So it means that we're not able to formulate the general rules. We have heard many contributions today and yesterday, and those contributions presented totally different heritage, totally different conditions of protection, totally different communities which are responsible for that protection, and relatively, I don't know whether you agree or not with me, relatively small input and influence of the specialists on that. And probably there is the future. So probably we would be not able to conclude such a conference. Probably, you know, we already concluded many years ago that the theory of conservation has been fragmented. Theory of conservation has been fragmented. We don't have one universal theory of conservation. Instead of that, we have dozens or hundreds doctrinal documents. It means our theory is fragmented. And it seems to me that nowadays we could also conclude that the protection of monuments is fragmented as the theory is fragmented. That's the consequence, that the protection is fragmented into different pieces, into different specific group of heritage, into the different communities, into different regions, countries. There is no common platform to elaborate the common rules. So probably on the current state of that paradigm shift, because we don't know what will be the future. However, on the current state of that paradigm shift, the only option for us is to collect the great variety of the examples of us, how people are trying to cope to solve the problem in particular reality for the particular types of the heritage. Probably there is the only solution for now, and probably it's not possible to make a great synthesis of that. If that's true, what we can do, try to describe that variety in our papers, in our articles, and to distribute and to show the best attempts to solve that problem. It means the best practices in that fragmented protection of the heritage in different places, yes. And because of that, our group is very limited. Audience is also very limited. So the only chance, because we have heard many interesting case studies, please elaborate the papers, and then we collect all these papers, and then we are going to distribute to show, and maybe someday we would be able to create a new theory describing and leading our domain. Because again, if there is no theory behind the heritage protection and conservation, I'm repeating every year, there is no space for us. There is no space for us.
One, I think, uniting fact about everything that we've heard, and that is civil society. And the theory of civil society.
Yes, I'm not denying the civil society. I'm saying that the civil society will exist. However, without us, as the specialists.
We impact the theory of preservation and conservation for a civil society. So can't we broaden our notions of, maybe give directions for a civil society, recognize the fact that we're moving towards this. I don't know.
Okay, it's the question of the balance. Yes, when I'm saying about the role of the specialists, maybe you're right saying that our goal now is be part of that civil society. Yes.
Or even I yesterday said education, and I got feedback that was too strong a word, but we do have a role in spreading awareness about monuments, about the built community. I think a lot of people don't recognize how much the built community impacts their lives. So I think raising that awareness and working with civil society and creating some kind of theoretical groundwork for that type of work might require specialists.
Yeah.
I think it just we have to do the same thing, but in a different format. And I definitely think there's a space for experts to have a play in leading.
I understand your point, but for example, in my work, in my department, I'm always saying to my collaborators, please propose only the solutions which could be under our control. Don't delegate the proposals which are beyond our control. You understand? So from that point of view, I absolutely agree that education is a crucial factor, but this is beyond our abilities to influence on the education of the societies, yes? Because we are nowadays part of the ICOMOS family, and we are the committee of theory, and our role is to advise to that society, to that limited circle of professionals, what to do in the current situation. Because to say, it's absolutely obvious that the education is for everything, for the healthy, for the economy, for the peace. And
I sort of feel like if we do have a built structure, and I'm new in this structure, then perhaps there's a way to reform the way we reach out to civil society. Like you have the ability you have the name, you have the authority to reach out to on internets, on social media, for people to reach out to you and seek suggestion for the way to handle a certain situation. I mean, I think I would find that very helpful if I'm trying to preserve monuments in the Carpathians and I need some help about knowing how to go about this. So I still think there's a theoretical, I think we have to have some theory behind it.
well, that was a good starting point for the discussion, Giora and colleague.
Well, of course, there is a place for us, for, let's say, conservation specialists, whether in training, educating, sending the messages, fighting for conservation. But with a lot of experience, I can say, unfortunately, finally, we are not decision makers. Not even the director in Greece. is to a certain level. Decisions are taken finally, unfortunately, by politicians and by those who have the money. And only the first-class monuments, where there's no question, will be protected without our fights. But even looking at the presentation of Istanbul, where most of what we saw is from 1960s and later, there'll be a question. People don't want to live in these houses. How do you even justify that these houses are worth preserving? And it will always be the question. So that's why in my presentation long ago, I wrote, and it's a permanent struggle. It will be a permanent struggle.
But in the permanent,
Sorry, colleague at the back, and then of course. Again?
Nilüfer in the top left-hand corner.
From Turkey.
From Turkey.
We have a hand from Turkey.
Top left-hand corner.
Okay, so please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. No, it was just to add on to what you were saying. Well, design and architecture planning, everything is about facilitating right now in our new world, what we have come to. So heritage is, of course, about facilitating as well. And we have to be, as Jorah said, we are not the decision makers. We can only mediate between the decision makers and the community. And as you have said, we can help create awareness. And we can perhaps direct this awareness toward a sustainable preservation that may be possible in the current economic situation. So we have to be mediators. We have to keep strategies. The story we told in the last 20 years, our strategies have completely changed. It's an ongoing process. We are looking for new solutions. It was just an addition to that. So it's not only about the theory. Yes, the theory is guidelines overriding. We have some sets, we have some boundaries that we do not cross, but we have to work around them, updating them, at least updating the strategies. Thanks.
Thanks, lady at the back. You, please.
Thank you very much. On the points you mentioned about complexity and fragmentation, it seems to me like in earlier years, everything seemed more simple, maybe because it was a simpler set of actors discussing it. And as the world, like the whole complexity of the world, the diversity of the cultures, they are coming onto the stage as actors joining the discussion. This chaos and complexity is natural, and we have to just go through it. Like my friend Ebru yesterday said, there was a psychological strategy of going through things, there is a question I want to ask about Faro. Today, actually, we're discussing the Faro Convention, and it seems really interesting how low popularity of ratification and signing there is. I think that's actually a good question to understand why. On one side, it's the Council of Europe that has, this very important body representing so much policy that has actually said this for us. So it's accepted that, yes, we need the communities. And it's not only the Council of Europe, we have UNESCO talking about the 5 Cs, one of them being the community. We have the 2030 agenda talking about people, planet, people-centered approaches. But it seems that this kind of high speed runs into a lot of barriers in implementation. State parties or other stakeholders can't accept it so easily. There is some political problem there, in different situations, and it's a whole governance problem. And a lot of the reasons I'm guessing why Faro would not be popular related to power sharing and the evolution of power. This is a general problem in the world. General problems of governance and politics influences heritage in the same way. And we need to understand governance and politics better ourselves as heritage people in the Commons, I think. And another point, sorry, I have a few points just to go quickly through this. Now, trying to make sense of this very complex, diverse ecosystem we see, maybe we can really oversimplify saying, okay, there's the community as one type of stakeholders, there's the authorities, the real official decision makers, and then the heritage experts. Sometimes the community is on the side of heritage, pro-heritage, sometimes it's against conservation. Sometimes the authority is pro-conservation, sometimes against conservation. And we, the heritage experts, are always, of course, pro-conservation. There are different scenarios, there are different combinations of these. But it seems us as heritage scientists or experts, we need to engage both with community and authorities for positive outcomes for heritage. So it's kind of an attempt to simplify everything. And if we are scientists with a cause for truth and reason and scientific techniques, there are many other scientists in the world. It's not just heritage scientists. And I call climate scientists. The poor climate scientists are really, struggling with Trump's denial or other politicians' denial. And I read somewhere a climate scientist saying, I thought we had all the technology to answer this question. But no, we are losing this battle because it's the cultural battle, the battle of convincing, right? So again, communication, So yeah, those are my things.
Absolutely, you're right that we're under that huge pressure. Even I give you the good example. I remember many, as Giora, we remember many general assemblies and discussion of ICOMOS. And even 10 years ago, we were dealing mainly with so-called problems which were described in doctrinal documents, but they were created and accepted by the specialists, by ICOMOS, for example, and Faro Convention, for example, and Hull recommendation. When I read the current documents, these are the most important quoted documents. But we have to understand and to remember that Faro Convention, as you mentioned, has been accepted by whom? By Council of Europe. This is the body responsible for the Europe, for development, for the economy, not for the heritage at all. The same situation, if you probably know the story about the whole recommendation, it was also against the heritage protection. The whole recommendation has been created to weaker heritage protection, against the heritage protection. And nowadays, this is obliging document because that was resulting of the long story in Vienna after the inscription of that. And we are now treating, and now we are discussing about those two documents, which are from outside. There is the outside pressure on the heritage protection. And from my understanding, and the group, they created that committee few years ago, was how we should cope with that problem, feeling ourselves responsible for the heritage protection, not for the civil society, not for the economy, not for the sustainable development, not for the climate changes, because in our society, we are a small group responsible for the heritage protection. So how we should cope with that? So frankly speaking, from my perspective, our discussion about the Faro Convention is how to survive having Faro Convention, despite of the Faro Convention. That's the challenge for us. Not how to be part of that huge movement and to go faster and faster and faster, because they are going very fast even without us. But of course, that's my personal point of view, because I mentioned a few times on that during this conference that from my perspective, the heritage protection is weaker, weaker, and weaker in every place, in every state. If you disagree, fantastic. Maybe in your country is stronger, stronger, and stronger.
Yeah. I don't think the argument should be tackled this way. We can be leaders or enlighteners as well as proactive or reactive to a problem. At the moment, at the very least, you portray yourself as somebody who's reactive to a problem, and that problem has become a different kind of problem. That problem doesn't come to us anymore. I think we could be proactive, we could be leaders, we could be people who would champion, if you will, the cause of conservation, rather than, oh, nobody likes us anymore. You know, there's a completely different way of looking at the problem, in my view. So, at the very least, I came to this profession thinking I'm doing something good. Yeah. Not that because there was a market for it. It was a completely different approach to why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I think that needs to be the next step for the profession, to become leaders and champions and enlighteners, if you will.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But in order to be a leader in particular reality, the first step is fully understand that reality. What are the pros and cons? And then based on, and because of that, we organize that conference to understand weak and strong points of.
Perfectly. Conferences of the experts should allow us this discourse and to see which way we go forward. But I'm afraid you package it in a very negative way. So, so I'm kind of very worried about that negative package that you just put forward.
Of course.
Yes, I agree with you, and I think we go through that as part of mentioning widening our concept of conservation with this we're talking about the broader discussion, because we don't know everything always, even for conservation architects. And I'm also thinking about what has happened during these 50 years since Venice Charter was signed. I mean, it was very much a Western European document, and now it has been broadened continuously, and now it really involves the whole world, and we have people from different parts of the world here today. And I think that is a big achievement.
Yes.
And I think that is something we should embrace, that we cannot just look like this, we have to broaden our discussion.
Of course.
Well, I think we have to keep it lead, and we should be leaders and so on. But from time to time, I think, imagine if we decided to create a political party with the cause of conservation of cultural heritage. Would we have a chance to be elected by civil society? Probably not. And that's a big part of the problem. How to convince, that's why we have to keep fighting, and every small success is big.
Okay, so any other? Yes, please. Okay. Who is Michal?
Of course. I come from a different world. I studied it in the United States, and I live in Israel, and we have never had the position that you have or had in Eastern Europe. Conservation experts never had the position that you used to have. So I cannot lament something that we never did have. And what I'm seeing is actually a more involvement on our part. And we're now an official part of the planning teams on the national level, on the regional level, on the urban level. And of course, there are difficulties. And in Israel specifically, we have a huge pressures. We are facing huge pressures because the population is increasing constantly. So there's urban renewal all over the country. So we are facing we're facing problems. But I think that when I'm looking at all these new conventions or newer conventions, what I try to take from them are the good things, the positive things that add and make our profession varied. Things that we didn't think about before and that we need to think about now. And I think that's positive. And for myself, I think what worries me is not the world in which we live, but rather us, the professionals, the lack of best practice among us, the lack of knowledge among us. I think that if we were to act responsibly, professionally, our professional world would be much better, and we would have much more success in implementing conservation. So my view is not a negative one, it's a positive one in a changing world, which, face it, that's what we're doing all the time.
Thanks a lot. Any other colleagues? Any comments? Yes. Diane, please.
Diane, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm digressing a little from this conversation, which is very important and wonderful to be participating in this. And I just wanted to take a moment, perhaps before the discussion is over. I would like to thank everyone. It's our 20th anniversary for our committee. And I would like to thank Simone Gimaretti and the Romualdo Del Bianco Foundation for their hospitality, their kindness over all of these years in managing every detail of our conferences and in providing us with a safe and a respectful place for these intercultural dialogues. And on my 15th anniversary in February with our committee, I would like to thank our president, Boguslav, my colleagues, for 15 years of an enriching exchanges and collegiality. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. After these words, it's again, dear colleagues, Simone, that was applause for you. Simone, that was applause for you. As always, for the whole staff of the Del Bianco Foundation.
Oh,
yes.
thank you. Yeah, that's precious.
Thanks a lot. We would like to express our gratitude to all of you for the presence, for the preparation of the papers, chairmans, and again, please, until the end of April, please prepare the articles. Nigel is going to distribute the call. Of course, again, everybody is invited to present the paper. Yes, that's one announcement. The next conference, it means I know that you are hungry to discuss more. So because of that, the next conference will be organized in Liège. We know the date. That would be the beginning of November. We're going to discuss about summarizing the achievements of ICOMOS in creation of the theory of conservation. We're open also, Nigel will distribute the call. Please propose the topics for the next year. Yes, again and again. We're going to meet in March in Florence again, I hope, I guess.
I suggest July, so we avoid such a kind of time, but it depends on you, of course.
Yes.
Just let the ceiling.
Yes. Thanks a lot for your patience. And Simone, the final announcement, yes?
Yeah. I so embarrassed because I'm not worthy of such a recognition and such appreciation, but as I told yesterday, we are so connected and with the ICOMOS theory that whenever we organize something is for us simply a joy, and we are also, as I told yesterday, engaged in continuing and even stronger inform you about what is going on with our foundation. As I told yesterday, I don't want to repeat anymore. This is the time, a very quite critical time. We perceive that it's quite critical time. There are a lot of problematic situation, and we feel from the bottom of our soul that we can continue and pursue our efforts in promoting through heritage, protecting and enhancing heritage as a powerful means for making people together. And respect the diversity, respect each other, to launch from with the microphone of the heritage, a global message of brotherhood and respect each for the diversity. And of course, we really are glad that to have to our side Boguslav and Nigel and all this board of the ICOMOS and all the network. 192 people as registered, by the way. I have to update the list of the countries because there are more than 54. So, but nevertheless, it's for us, it's really important that we can share ideas with people from different parts of the world right now, here in present or connected, because it's a way for to be sharing information, share knowledge, but it's a way to share the human feelings of brotherhood and mutual respect and appreciation. So thank you very much. And after so long a conversation, let me go to a practical detail. I apologize the friends online that couldn't enjoy the typical Tuscan meal of tonight. But for the lucky person who are here in the room, I recommend to be here few minutes before the 7, and then we go to the Cipolla Rossa, typical Tuscan trattoria that is just right on the corner, and we conclude in the best human and enjoyable way this meeting. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you. Also online, I thank all the friends there. Smiling faces is the best appreciation of our community. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So you don't so now
ask our friends from Rome and we have the spot because we have the third already. About the